Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the second part of the human resource parameters. We're going to start continuing to talk about the human resource parameters that are applicable to a legal entity, which in this case is BRMF. And let's get into it. So if you click on the human resources, we go right into the human resource parameters right underneath as a setup. So if you click on that, we actually talked about the general setup, all the fields that are applicable, where they reside within the system, and how they're displayed. So we're going to talk about the recruitment today. So recruitment piece is very unique, you could say, just because there is no applicant tracking system that is out of the box for Dynamics 365. So in this case, when you actually have apply, when your client is asking for an applicant tracking system, for instance, then you would want to make sure that you know exactly what applicant tracking systems are available in the Microsoft App Source or Store. And there are quite a few that are applicable. They can get integrated very nicely, so you won't even need a technical resource from your end to establish a connection, just because the vendors will have that APIs connected, and all you need to do is make sure that you have a legal signage of their contract with them. So your client, of course, is the one who is paying or who will be paying these vendors and to use their ATS system. So you want to make sure that you give them quite a few possible, um, you want to say the options in order for them to make that decision. And of course, cost comes in handy. Cost is one thing that you want to make sure as a consultant, you advise them accordingly just to see where their budget lies. So with the recruiting ATS and whatnot, once you have that integrated, there are only a handful of parameters that you can set up that would allow you to make this module fully functional in as a recruitment experience, like recruitment enabled. Yes, as of now, this toggle button can say on and off. It doesn't really matter, to be honest, just because we don't have an ATS system enabled. So when I select a recruitment experience and recruitment projects, once we have an ATS system established, then we can start configuring some of these things, and I'll talk about it a little bit more. So with an assumption that the ATS system is established, we'll try to create a recruitment experience. We want to make sure that we have only two options available, so we can't have more than that. We want to make it applicable to the need of our clients. So either they create projects like recruitment projects, if they have a big project coming up in the summer, for instance, and they want to do massive recruitment, this would be more applicable. But if they do normal day-to-day recruitment, then the HR recruitment could be the option for them. So we'll do a massive applications, number of applications that we're going to use for ATS, and then a massive hire, for instance, would be the right word to say. So recruitment experience could be for that. Word type. So in this case, you can have file, image, node, or URL. So you want to make sure that it's configured as file. So when the applicant tracking system sends you some of the files, you want to make sure that it's considered as a file. It's like a Word document, and that gets stored into your recruitment project. So if you go into the recruitment, for instance, all the applications, you want to integrate it, of course, to the applications and applicants and then recruitment projects. And this is what we're talking about. So when you create a project, it's going to go underneath here. So all of that is actually gone through the integration points. And that's why it's a very hefty activity to go through the integration pieces. But as a functional consultant, it is your job to guide the technical resource, to guide the vendor where all of that information is going to sit. So a big plan, a big picture is of course required. These parameters only play a small role into that big picture. So email document type, so it's the same concept as the Word document type. So if you are receiving emails directly through the ATS system, what kind of file that you would be allowed and applicable to that module. Application attachment document type, somewhat the same concept, to be honest. You want to select file for most part, because all of these are applicable to a file. So you want to make sure that you somehow get a document, a file into your human resources recruitment module. The recruitment email account, this is very unique, so it has to be a universal account. So a lot of times I have used D365 at services and then the organization's name.com, for instance. And that's the email account that gets used. So every time you send out an email, then that email is being used to send that email out to a candidate. Recruitment projects, so unsolicited, if you want to select this recruitment project, that will be associated with some other unsolicited application for employment. So nothing that I would say I have personally used, not very applicable. It is probably applicable to a US industry, US applicants. So nothing that I would say you would need to worry about. Recruitment project aging. So here, as we talked about this recruitment projects, and if you were to go into recruitment project and create one, for instance, these periods and number of days play a role. So how long is your recruitment project, and how long you're going to continue to get applicants into the system and start reviewing them? This is where that plays a role in. And then application deadline warning. So this actually gives you a warning on in the system that you have these applications coming to close. So you try to advertise as much as you can, basically, in order to get the most applicants into your system. And then application expiration. So it's basically a number that will give you that how many applications have expired that are relevant to the project, to the recruitment project that you are working on. So this, all these parameters actually play a big role, or more or less, like not a big role, but a somewhat a small role into the bigger picture of the applicant tracking system and the recruitment integration piece. And same thing with the compensation. So not so much that you would be able to configure here. So we'll talk about how you actually configure a compensation plan and all of that. So that's pretty exciting to actually go through. So quite a few steps are involved, quite a few interlinked forms and tables that would allow you to assign a compensation to an employee. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But in this case, you have only two parameters that you want to set up. Rating source actually comes in, plays a bit of a role into the performance. So when you run these performance metrics, that's where this role will play. If you assign a rating, for instance, to an employee based on your compensation, how that changes the compensation at the year end, that's where this stuff comes in handy. That, of course, hasn't been fully blown by the Microsoft, so that functionality is just not there yet for organizations to use and utilize. So it's still upcoming, it is being enhanced, but that's the idea overall for these two parameters. And if you want to restrict the compensation plans to a person, to some of the legal entities, then you can have this toggle button. Of course, you would have to still play a role with the security in the organization administration. So that is another whole big topic that we will talk about at some point. So with that, I would close this um, human resource parameter second part video. We'll talk about number sequences. Actually, that's pretty important. It's universal across all modules. So even when you're creating journals, for instance, or you're creating purchase order, number sequence play a role in there. So in this case, the number sequence will play a role with the employee IDs and positions and job ID and whatnot. So all of that is going to get configured in the system. So you want to make sure that this is human resource parameters, right? It's only applicable to BRMF. And for that reason, you want to make sure that number sequences are configured as applicable to the client's needs as possible. And then every legal entity will have their own number sequences. With that, I will close this video, and just as a reminder, make sure that if you need to get in touch, you need to get into the space. I have created services for reviewing resumes and creating some resumes from scratch, maybe even explaining some of the tricks that you would need to know to in order to get into this space. So I can definitely give you some advice on it. So feel free to connect on the link that I'll share in the description, and we can go from there.